What's up, everyone? We are here with another take, and today we're going to be talking about revisiting Taino spirituality in 1492. 1492, in my opinion, was a very interesting year. Uh, it was a time where the Moorish Empire in Spain fell, and also it was also the same time where Columbus made his first voyage into the Western world, where European nations first learned about Caribbean societies and other Western indigenous societies. So, with that, one thing that always comes to mind is the narrative between the lost tribes of Israel and the Tainos. So, my question to you is, where did the myth of the lost tribes begin with the misconception of the Tainos? So, what is your take on that?
Um, well, when the Europeans came to the Americas, the first time they encountered the Mayans and the Aztecs and the natives there, of course they encountered the Tainos. But a lot of people believe that Columbus brought an interpreter who spoke Hebrew into the Americas named Luis de Torres, if I'm mistaken. And there was some type of a story, an allegory that the natives spoke Hebrew, and that they were the 12 tribes of Israel. Of course, everybody knows who the 12 tribes were. They were story allegories in the Bible, and of course, there are allegories in the Torah, the Hebrew Bible. Now, before I get into that, I just want to just say something real quick that there's possibilities that there were people who traveled to the Americas prior to Columbus, and there are evidence of this. Some people believe the Knights Templars came here. There's evidence of this too. Irish monks. But one of the things is that was interesting is there is evidence to suggest, and you have to really do your research for this, that Columbus's stepfather or father-in-law was a part of a society or a group called the Knights of Christ. And these people were descendants of the Knights Templars. They were like Freemasonry and stuff. They had maps that can really had geographical drawings of the images and directions to the Americas. And this is the possibility of how Columbus kind of had that thought of traveling and noticing that that there were other places in the other side, other islands and other side. That's why he probably traveled. Now, the whole story of how these 12 tribes of Israel and the natives really being the 12 tribes were because of when the Europeans encountered the Mayans, they found resemblance between both cultures, especially the spirituality and the religiosity of both, between Christianity and the Mayans. And one of the things is going to kind of sound pretty weird to some people out there, and it's going to sound pretty like controversial, but you really have to do some research. Is that when the Mayan god Quetzalcoatl, he told the Mayans that he would be back, he would return. You see, the Mayans they also had a symbol resembling the Christian symbol, and that was the cross. But the cross was a little different. And when Quetzalcoatl left, or when he first arrived, actually when he first came to the Mayan mythology, there is stories that he had a cross in his neck too. And when he said he would return, and the Europeans came, they had crosses with them. and the Mayans kind of thought that Quetzalcoatl was returning. And some people believe because they were white, because there are stories that Quetzalcoatl was white, and it was none of that. White doesn't specifically describe something that is on white skin. It specifically is described as something that's just pure. I'd say that he was purity, and he was an enlightened person. That's what it is, like the sun. But anyways, yeah, so when the Europeans came in and the Mayans kind of saw that, they thought, oh, Quetzalcoatl is coming back, because they saw the crosses. Now, the original Christian cross that you see now were not the original cross that were back then. The cross that they had was something that you call Chi-Rho, and Chi-Rho was like an X and a P on top. That was the original Christian cross before it changed to the cross we see today. The Chi-Rho. So anyways, the cross that the Mayans, you can research this, was a regular cross, but it was very similar, because the Christians came and they saw that the Mayans did circumcisions. They saw that the Mayans did fastings for 40 days, just like they see that Moses climbed the mountains of 40 days and 40 nights, and it rained for 40 days and 40 nights, and fasting for 40 days, and circumcisions, just like in the Christian. And that Quetzalcoatl was crucified also as well, and he was on a cross, and he was born from a virgin, and etc. And they found this to be like, how is this possible? And what you see, you also have to understand that back in those times, when Christians kind of saw that resembling their story, they took a lot of the monuments and a lot of the documents and codices and then destroyed them, because they resembled them so perfectly. Now, most people would believe, okay, it resembles them most perfectly. Does that mean that they are maybe a tribe from Ephraim or whatever came to the Americas? Not exactly. It just means that at one time that there was just one religion or one spirituality that probably at one time in this world, because you can see swastika symbols, for example, in India, Egypt, Native American, even North American tribe got swastika symbols. Why? It resembled them, and there's the reason why, because they were probably one religion. And back in those times, there's just a lot of things that need more study. I would not get into, because it's just a different story.
Right.
But anyways, but yes, when the Europeans came in, they saw very resemblance of Quetzalcoatl and Jesus Christ, you know. So, and some of the monks kind of switched. When they saw the resemblance, they kind of switched the names of them because it resembled. Like, for example, some of the monks called Quetzalcoatl Baku, like Jaku. You know what I mean? And to really research this, I would recommend getting this book here. It's called Bible Myths and Their Parallels in Other Religions. This is a very good book. It's a very, very informative book. It's about, I would say, about 500-600 pages. But it's quite a read. And I would recommend, and it was really saved me a lot of the talking, and you can just do your own research on this book. But now, when there is another story now to the Taino people, and one of them is that in Guayanilla, Puerto Rico, there was these Aguebana, they call them Aguebana libraries, and there were these specific rocks that they found with unique writings that were not native or anything they've seen before. Now, the story goes that Padre Nazario, who was the father of priest of Guayanilla, a lady back in the 18th century, he gave him these rocks that she said that she was descendant of Aguemana. She was an Indian, and she gave it to him, and then he put them away, and there were thousands of them, you know. And people found, and then years later, the archaeologists found they found the rocks, and they came to find out that these writings are probably Phoenicians, which the Phoenicians were great sailors. They actually travel around the world. They really did. They were awesome sailors, and they spoke Semitic language too, and they're very similar to Hebrew languages. But it's where we get the word phonetic, the phonetic language, Phoenician phonetic. They were great speakers and great sailors too. But the writings turned out to be not Phoenician on the Agomna rocks. It turned out to be Crete, possibly. But it's probably they weren't even in Puerto Rico. Somebody must have came from other places and probably traded with them and gave these people these rocks. So they probably weren't even native to Puerto Rico, you know what I mean? But it turned out that these was Crete language, and it turns out they were probably trying to teach them mathematics or some type of language, you know what I mean? Not that there were similarities between the languages, because they weren't. But that was one thing, and there's still studies doing this. There's still more studies to be discovered with these rocks. A lot of it hasn't been really fully looked into yet, and there's still some archaeologists. Another thing I wanted to really put into that's quite interesting, just to get out there, is that I found very interesting is back to how the Jesus and stuff that in the Kalinago myth. There's a story of Loco, who is the god of the Kalinagos, and they believe that he was called the first man, or the first man born from the sky, with no father, just from the mother goddess, and he was resuscitated in 3 days, and just like Jesus were risen in 3 days. Another thing you have to take into consideration with the Tainos too, with the language of Yokahu, Yokahu's name, Yokahu Pagua Maracote, it just means that he was born from a virgin too, because Yokahu Pagua Maracote means Yokahu Pagua water, Maracote. So Yokahu Pagua Maracote, which means born water without father or ancestor, but it just means he was born without a father, just from mother. But there's possibility. There's just a lot of things that's just very interesting with all types of cultures that have a lot of similarities. There's just always a hero on a journey, or always a hero born from this virgin or without a father and stuff like that. So, and there is a lot of a misinterpretation of the virgin birth. I will not get into that because this is not based on this conversation is not based on that type of. This is a different subject. But yes, that's really my take on that with the Hebrew.
Sorry. Yeah. So another thing I want to bring up is the Taino language, because in my opinion, there is also a lot of misconception between the Taino language and the Hebrew. For example, going back to Columbus, when Columbus and other Spanish ethnographers at that time, such as Ramon Banet, they did not know much about the Taino and other related Arawakan languages at that time, because like I said, when the Europeans along with Columbus arrived into the Antilles, a lot of that was new. So paralleling the Taino language with the Hebrew, in my opinion, it gave a lot of confusion, because linguistically those are two different oral speaking languages. So I also would like to know your take in regards to that.
Well, the Hebrew language is a very interesting language, and it's a very sacred language. It is. Believe it or not, I've been studying the Hebrew for some time, and with some Egyptian, and I find that Hebrew is a branch of the Egyptian language. But anyways, now to compare with the Taino with Hebrew, there is no comparisons. I don't find really comparisons with it. What you will find is that in languages is that you will find that they're probably the same definition, but in a different language. You know, like for example, the quasi-quotal is very similar to the Jesus in Greek, right? And the Horus, but it's a different. It's just in their language, it's just called quasi-quotal. You know what I mean? But I don't find them to be the same at all. It's just misconception. Now, with Columbus coming to the Americas with a Hebrew speaker, apparently he spoke Hebrew, Luis de Torres. When he went to Cuba, Luis de Torres, and he tried to speak Hebrew, they didn't understand what he was saying. You know what I mean? So if Hebrew, if the natives spoke Hebrew, they would have kind of spoke back. They didn't understand what he was saying. So what Columbus did is that he actually adopted a son to teach him Spanish. I believe his name was Diego, who was a Taino descent. We had to adopt. He was the interpreter for him when he was for a while. I believe he escaped back in another voyage. He kind of jumped off the boat and went back to his family. But so if Hebrew, if it was so, if Taino were very descendant of the Hebrews, why would he adopt or take natives as an interpreters for him? You know, it just doesn't make any sense. Why not just bring Hebrew speakers with him and just does the conversation instead of kidnapping other native people, making them and teaching them Spanish to interpret another language for them? It just doesn't make any sense. You know, so right there, you can see how that kind of like contradicts the purpose. To me, it doesn't make any sense. But as in comparison with the Taino and the Hebrew, I don't see no comparisons with that at all. It's just it just doesn't make any sense.
Okay, definitely. That was a good one. One thing also I would like to mention, and then we can wrap it up. A lot of this was unfamiliar with our ancestors until after the missionaries started introducing these new concepts and having the natives translate their doctrine into their language. And it wasn't until after that when the concept of, you know, the story of Jesus and Mary became known to the natives. Was until, you know, missionaries started coming and indoctrinating indigenous communities.
That's true. Some of the stories kind of stick with them, you know. And some of the stories the natives kind of found resemble theirs as well. I believe there is a story of the Abjiwa people. I don't know how to pronounce their name, but in their story it's called the Gusts of the Wind myth. And the Gusts of the Wind myth was that before there were any humans on Earth, before there were even people, there was just this girl walking in her blouse, and this wind came out of nowhere and impregnated her, you know, and she didn't know she was pregnant, and her stomach was hurting. So this old woman said, you know, were you walking around? She said, yes, but was there a man in front of you? She said, no. She said, you're going to give birth to the son called Jesus or Jesus. Now, I've been trying to actually find the Abjiwa native person to find how that name is, or that story is correct, you know what I mean? So that's one thing. So you can see how that name and that virgin birth is very similar to the Jesus we have now. But now is the character of the Jesus and some of the Virgin Mary myths. You see this everywhere. You see this in Hinduism and Krishna. Krishna becomes Christ, is the same as Jesus, and you can see a lot of these familiarities between all the cultures, you know. And it's now that archaeologists, there is a story of the Abjiwa people. I've been trying to find an Abjiwa speaker or a Abjiwa descendant person to see how correct the story is, and because it's a very intriguing story. And what's interesting is that the story is that before the humans existed in the world, any humans, there was this woman. She was just walking around, and the wind kind of blew her blouse, and it turns out she was pregnant, you know, and she didn't knew she was pregnant, but there was something in her stomach, she realized, and this old woman repeated. I told the old woman and what was going on, and the old woman asked her, were you around any men? She said, no, there was nobody, it was just the wind. And she said, yes, you're going to be born with the sun god named Jesus. So you can see how that name is very similar to the Christian Jesus, and you will find that same story, what I'm telling you now, in the Mayans. You find this in Taino, Yokahupa. You find this in local and Kainago. You find this in Egyptian and Greek. You find this in the Hebrew. I mean, you'll find this in every language. I mean, every culture. But is it meaning that the 12 tribes came and kind of taught? No, it doesn't mean anything like that. It's a possibility that there was just a one-time spirituality, and it's just people have the same story in their own language. You know, there's always a story of a hero born from a virgin and without a father. They calling him the begotten son, you know, etc. But there's other meanings to it. For the 12 tribes of Israel coming in and teaching these people, and I don't really buy it. You know what I mean? I have different opinions on that. You know.
Yeah, definitely. I think closing out, I will definitely say that references to the 12 tribes is a fictional narrative, and also in regards to our Taino ancestors and other indigenous societies, many of their narratives is based on the stars.
That's correct. Yeah, it's based on the 12 tribes are based on the 12 zodiac signs. You know, and the 12 the ancients were astrologers. You know, and it goes back to the Chaldeans and the Egyptians and etc. So we all know that the 12 tribes are based on the 12 zodiac signs, and you can read the Sefer Yetzirah that talks about how these 12 tribes are related to the 12 zodiacs. You know, and you know, they were astrologers. The Mayans were astrologers. You know, these ancient cultures knew about the stars. They were Sabians. As what I mean is, they were star worshippers. You know, and to be a star worshipper back in that day, you were considered a sorcerer or a black magic, because it really contradicted the Christian religion. You know, because they didn't believe that. And some of the Christian religious people really didn't understand the Bible, you know what I mean? And what they don't know is that in the Bible, astrology is mentioned in there, and it's called the Masorah, you know what I mean? But they took that out, as in the King James Bible. You don't really see this, you know what I mean? Because they kind of took that. It's called the Masorah. And the Masorah it means constellation. And that was the word for astrology, you know, and astrology was a big thing to the ancients, you know. So as being there's original 12 tribes, I don't really buy that, you know. There's esoteric meanings to it, you know. There is a lot of connections probably with the body, because each zodiac signs corresponds with the human body, you know. So, which is, I won't get into that either, because this is kind of a different perspective on it. But you know, you can't really take the 12 tribes of Israel really literally, you know, because the Bible is something that's not really literally, and it's only meant for people who has the eyes to see and the ones who has the ears to hear.
Definitely, that's a good take. So With that, I say peace and until the next take.